When police confront dangerous situations that threaten life and public safety, they call in a team of dedicated and specially trained elite officers called SWAT. Special Weapons and Tactics. These are their stories. The Los Zetas drug cartel ambushed two Immigration and Customs Enforcement agents called ICE on a dangerous stretch of highway in 2011. Special Agent Victor Avila was severely wounded. His partner, Jaime Zapata, was killed. In the aftermath of the tragedy, an investigation by the U.S. Office of Special Counsel confirmed Avila's allegations that ICE officials had failed to properly train and support the agents for such dangerous missions. Avila, a native of El Paso, has written a book about the incident titled Agent Under Fire, A Murder and a Manifesto. He also takes us into the current day human smuggling by the Mexican cartels. This is the first of a two-part episode. Victor Avila continues to seek justice for his partner's death. Victor, thank you for your service and for joining us on this episode of SWAT Brothers. And this is the book, Agent Under Fire, that we want to talk to you about. But first, let's start. You're from El Paso. What was your path into law enforcement?
First of all, thank you so much for having me. Glad to be here and to share the story. I grew up, born and raised in El Paso, Texas, and I can't say I was one of those kids that wanted to be a police officer from a young age. I did have an inclination once I became a teenager. I became an El Paso Police Explorer, which is tied to the Boy Scouts.
Yes,
and served along with the police officers and got firsthand to not only be amongst the police officers and see them as humans. I was raised to respect authority, and somewhat that respect also was a healthy fear of the police. Every time a police would pull up next to you, you kind of tighten up and make sure everything's okay in your vehicle. And so what it helped me is to see the human side of the police officers by seeing the inside of the offices, the patrolling with them, working the parades. And it really opened a different side of the law enforcement. I just saw them as normal people and that had lives and liked to barbecue just like my dad did as well. And so that kind of started the progression. El Paso is unique, and there's a lot of heavy presence of law enforcement, especially of federal law enforcement there, from Border Patrol, U.S. Customs, and going into college for a criminal justice degree. My goal was to become a U.S. Customs special agent. I had seen and worked with the inspectors this is prior Department of Homeland Security. This is prior 9/11, obviously, and really was in awe of the special agents, the criminal investigators that came in response to a seizure at the port of entry. And when I saw them, I said, "Who are these guys? They're in civilian clothes." Well, they're our detectives. They're the ones that actually investigate all the crimes that happen along the border. I didn't know that, and that was 1994. That 10 years later, I was going to become one of those after going through a different path in my career, becoming a state parole officer for the state of Texas. That really, as a 23-year-old, getting embedded into the criminal world and dealing with individuals that have been in prison. Gang members, sex offenders, violent offenders. I supervised them and was a surveillance officer to keep our community safe, and only had certain areas where they were allowed to go, and I was assigned to keep them from going to different locations. But nevertheless, it exposed me to the criminal underworld. A lot of people think, well, individuals go to prison and they stay there forever, and that's just not the case. Almost everyone at one point will come out. And so my natural progression, I'm an ambitious person. I noticed that there was the same position for me on the state at the federal level as a federal probation officer. And so I became a federal probation officer, did that for 5 years.
So let me ask you about your parole experience, and it touches home because I have another podcast called True Crime Reporter. And the first season of it is focused on a serial killer named Kenneth McDuff, who bribed his way out of prison. And it was at a time in 1988, 89, 90, early 90s, in which it was a revolving door system because of prison overcrowding. And so some members of the parole board, including the chairman, took advantage of, hey, we'll just start taking money. Um, I'm kind of curious what you saw. Now, there were reforms put in place after that, but one of the things that struck me is the board, and I don't think it even does to this day, they really have no method based on science or forensic psychiatry to assess, is this person a future danger to society? Are they a psychopath? Did you see what did you see on that?
Oh my goodness, I saw a lot of what the parole board, and a lot of the times the lack of, I guess, to put it lightly, the lack of supervision, the lack of oversight of that
Hmm.
department. And like you said, a lot of people were released erroneously by these boards. And I remember also there was a new law that had passed in Texas, and this is in the early 90s, a mandatory release because of the overcrowding. That no longer, it kind of cut the board out. And rightly so in certain ways, that the board didn't have to make a decision anymore. It became by law that this person had to be released after a certain amount of
Yeah.
serving of their sentence.
A very short time on the sentence. Yeah.
Yes, and most of the individuals, if not a very, very high percentage that I supervise, were on mandatory release and not technically parole. We all called it parole,
Right.
but technically it was not parole. It was a mandatory release by law. By that date, you had to be released from prison, and there was a lot of bad people coming out of prison into our communities, some into halfway houses, and then some straight out into the community. And so, yes, these parole boards are something else. I had quite of a reputation as a young parole officer. I just couldn't believe that some of these people were out in the street. And then when I became a parole officer, my work ethic was to start looking at these cases, and a lot of these people were in violation. And so I was known and quickly got a reputation of revoking these individuals and putting them back in
Right.
prison, which I was just doing my job. And that's what happened. I'd see the violations, I report them, get a warrant for them, and put them right back. And so I started. I thought I was doing good for the community to do that, because some of these individuals were, especially the sex offenders, were just
Yes.
incredibly dangerous.
Well, what was your sense when you see somebody who's got a record of violent crime? I'm not talking about drug dealers or car thieves. I'm talking about the ones that are using guns in crime, assaulting people. There's a record of violence with it. Um, did you ever see any evidence that you could really turn them back out again or rehabilitate them?
Absolutely not. The recidivism rate was incredible. And I had these, a lot of them were gang affiliated, and they would tell me, I would have these incredible conversations with them, candid conversations. And these criminals would tell me, listen, Victor, or they would call me Mr. Avila,
Hmm.
I'm holding back from committing a crime while I'm out here. My nature is to commit a crime, is to commit a robbery. When you let me go to the grocery store, I have to hold back and not taking the older lady's purse or carjacking somebody. This is the person that I supervise telling me this. This is their world. This is their life. Them going to prison is part of their cycle. In my family, if someone goes to prison, it's a tragedy. It's a horrific event. But for them, I would go and announce to the family members, by the way, your son is going to go back for another 2 or 3 years. Oh, okay, I guess he's not going to be here for this Christmas or this Thanksgiving, and very nonchalant take that kind of that news. But that's the world they live in, the crime world. That it's part of crime, prison, paying for the crime, and coming out and redoing it again. It's how they live.
And once you advanced in your career to ICE, I'm guessing you started to see that world because I saw it in the prison system becoming more hardened, more violent, more vicious, especially with the cartels.
Absolutely, and of course we'll talk about my experience, but because I was a gang intelligence officer, I had a very good understanding of the prison gangs, the street gangs that fed a lot of them into the prison system, and then the ones that crossed the border into Mexico. And a lot of the gangs that work with the cartels as enforcers, as these drug pushers. And so I'm very well aware of the criminal element and the level of violence. We saw this increase in the mid to late 90s, where there was a big shift where the cartels all of a sudden would shoot up locations, restaurants, clubs, something that you would never see before, to get people's attention, or to get their word across of what I talk about in the book as terrorists that they are now. And I think they've been like that for a long time. But absolutely, there has been a shift, and even more so in just in the last 10 to 15 years, the blatant the cartels really disregard and for any kind of authority. They're not afraid of anyone.
Well, and we see the cases where they just butcher people.
Oh yeah. I mean, there's horrific videos just that I receive. I have sources that I get some these
Mhm.
videos from, and just a week and a half ago, sometimes
Mhm.
I tell my friends and contacts that I have, man, these videos I can't even watch them anymore. They are extremely violent. They are decapitating people. They are, and I'll describe them here so people could understand what I see. They're pulling hearts out of people's heart chest, and they're still beating in their hand while they're dismembering their body while these people are alive. This is happening just right on the other side of Texas, and playing soccer with heads, human heads. It is incredible. It's barbaric. It's evil.
Mhm.
It is. I don't know what worse word to use to describe them. But those individuals are not just in Mexico. They're everywhere in the U.S. and in Texas.
Well, and then as a reporter covering the terrorism in Iraq, the war and all, I saw ISIS and certainly Al Qaeda doing the same thing in these other groups. And we went halfway around the world to do something about it, but we don't seem to do much about it right in our own neighborhood.
I talk about it all the time, that this issue with the cartels and these um, uh, terrorist organizations that I think should be deemed or designated as such are not 6,000 miles away, like you say. They're right next door, and yet we don't seem to do or care to do anything about it. And the conditions that we see right now at the border and how wide open they are, it's I'm astounded by the lack of response, because we're directly facing and absorbing the criminal element, the economic challenges, the health challenges, you name it, the school system challenges that we have from the illegal immigration, and not just illegal immigration, but the criminal element attached to that. Not everyone that comes over here is a criminal. However, there's a lot of individuals that have been in our country prior deports, prior criminal element that have served time, that are now taking advantage of coming right back in.
So take us to the subject of the book and your career. How does your career take you to the U.S. Embassy in Mexico City and then eventually into this ambush?
It started in 2008. I was in El Paso. I had done a great investigation. Took close to a year of a corrupt border patrol agent. That case was brought to me and was uh, was presented to me and said, "Victor, you want to do this case?" I said yes. It was a corrupt border patrol agent. Usually, the Office of Inspector General is the one that handles those cases, but they were understaffed and undermanned. That I was able to bring that case to justice, discovered who the corrupt border patrol agent was, took down the organization in Mexico, and so that got me a little bit of a cloud in my office to get to choose what I wanted to do. I wanted to do financial investigations. When I got into that, the Bank Secrecy Act, money laundering investigations, which I did.
The old adage of follow the money.
That's right. That's right. That's where you actually then get to make a difference, I think. And then your career sometimes just either career paths, that there was an opening at the U.S. consulate in Ciudad Juarez on the other side of El Paso, Texas. We had two ICE agents serving there. They needed help, and it was a temporary duty assignment. I was selected to go over there, and off of that selection came the permanent assignment to Mexico City. Once I was working there, I got to go to Mexico City, working on an arms trafficking case, and then it the stars align sometimes in your
Hmm.
career, positions open up, and I was offered a position to become a permanent ICE rep at the U.S. Embassy in Mexico City.
So when you cross the border in another country, what is your role? What are you doing? And are you armed?
The role, it's completely different. Now, all of a sudden, now you're a U.S. diplomat. I was a fully accredited diplomat with a black passport. You're a representative of the government, and you're still a special agent. However, you have absolutely no authority in that country other than a liaison
Hmm.
to that country. In this case, Mexico, because I've worked in Europe as well. And you're an advisor. You're a liaison. We have a very clear and set mission with that government, in this case Mexico, to help them in the war against the narco trafficking, the human trafficking, the human smuggling, many other issues across the border. At that time, there had been over 300 women missing in Ciudad Juarez, and so we had very involved with that as well. Mass graves, you name it. A lot of
Yes.
crime. And so we're there in a very supportive role, and also enhancing the investigations from stateside, where agents from throughout the U.S. have a case that stumbles into Mexico, and then we supplement and help them with those cases. Many looking for fugitives, looking for witnesses, is something that I did a lot as well in Mexico. And so and also my main focus when I was in Mexico City was human trafficking. I was head of the Global Trafficking in Persons Initiative, which my whole purpose there is to identify human trafficking organizations, and which I did, and find organizations that were taking women and children and trafficking them from Mexico into the U.S. And I was very successful in dismantling a lot of these groups, rescued many women and children from these horrific captivity situations in New York, Atlanta, Miami, Houston. And so a lot of that coordination with the government, but always with the government of Mexico under their authority.
And right. So you don't have the authority of the U.S. government and the legal system here. And as a reporter working this side of the border, I mean, I always just felt there was just systemic political corruption in Mexico. How did you get anything done? And how did you ever figure out, can I trust this person?
It's a great question, because we dealt with that on a daily basis, on an hourly basis in Mexico. And I'll put it to you this way: two individuals that I work very closely in Mexico are in custody right now. One is in custody in the United States for being working for the Sinaloa cartel. The other one is the one that showed up to the hospital after I was shot. The number two of the federal police had been a fugitive. He was just caught last week in Mexico for torture, corporate money laundering, and drug trafficking charges and corruption charges. Like you said, these are the individuals that we had to work with. We knew they were corrupt. We just didn't know the level of corruption. But it's something that you had to navigate on a daily basis, especially the information that you put out. Now, with me, I approached it very simply. I was honest. I was proud. I'm still very proud of my integrity. And I approached the government of Mexico and say, listen, here's the case. This is the information. If you want to go and rescue these kids and these children and take down these bad guys, that's up to you. Here, let's go, let's do it. In my office, they really wanted us to be participants in this, which is kind of goes into what happened with this assignment. They really wanted us to be present at these takedowns and law
Hmm.
enforcement activity. And I was very involved in a lot of these in Mexico, which sometimes I think I was more involved in Mexico than I was on stateside when it came to arrest warrants, search warrants. But that's maybe another podcast that we could talk about. But nevertheless, I was successful. I don't know if it was my honesty. I don't know what it was, that I was able to establish a great working relationship with the government of Mexico, their human trafficking units, their prosecution units, and we're able to work closely. Nevertheless, never undermining the corruption as well.
We're going to pause for a moment for a break. Okay, we're back from the break, and you were talking about being present at takedowns. Is this where you end up getting ambushed because you are present? And are you and your partner armed? Do you have any protection?
This ambush actually has nothing to do with any law enforcement action in Mexico. This is a botched assignment by my superiors, ICE in Mexico City. They had given me assignment on February 14th on Valentine's Day, 2011, to go pick up some equipment from our ICE agent, our ICE counterparts from the Monterrey consulate office. On the fly. I had just stepped into the office from another trip that I had come back from another investigation. Wasn't aware. I wasn't briefed. There was no operational plan. As you can imagine, in Mexico, everything was very methodical and well planned. In this case, that wasn't granted to me. They gave me the assignment. They said, you're going to take the TD wire, referred to Special Agent Jaime Zapata, who had just arrived in Mexico a little over a week. And it says, you're going to take him with you to help you drive. And had never met especially in Zapata, who had just arrived from Laredo office on a arms trafficking case. He was there supplementing agents that were coming in on a rotating basis to help out with this huge investigation, because our office was overwhelmed. At that time, the ICE office was the busiest office in the world. And you name the case, we were working at: money laundering, drug trafficking, human smuggling.
And this is the two of you alone?
This is the two of us alone, no backup, no reinforcement. Every time we drove on that Highway 57, I was very familiar with that highway. I had driven it many, many times.
And that runs from where to where?
From Mexico City straight up to Texas, in this case through Monterrey. But none of the things that the enforcement that were always afforded to us, either through Mexican military backup, Mexican police, or even other U.S. agents, that wasn't afforded to me. There wasn't enough time. They said, you go tomorrow. We want that equipment by close of business day, and you go in. And even though I challenged it, there was an alert by the ambassador saying not allowing anyone to drive on Highway 57. It's clearly, I have a copy of it, says you are prohibited from driving on Highway 57 for personal reasons or business reasons. And if in fact you do have to go on that road, you have to get special permission from the ambassador or the regional security office, which my office did not, and ignored that alert. Why did they ignore the alert? The alert was the Zetas control that corridor. We knew that. I mean, that's what we do in the country. We follow the intelligence. We knew about the intelligence, but my superiors ignored the intelligence. As a matter of fact, I quote the deputy attaché in the book, and I'll continue to quote him until I can't. And he says, when I questioned him, he said that he wasn't aware of any security issues in Mexico. And when your boss says that to you, the whole country of Mexico is a security issue. And so when you hear your boss tell you those words right back at you, it's either incompetence or they're doing this purposely, right? So it is, those are the people that I was dealing with in Mexico.
So tell our listeners about the Zetas, about, as I recall, now you got to correct me if I'm wrong, they were even trained by the U.S. and armed by the U.S. and then they go to the dark side?
The Zetas originally came and trained with Guatemalan forces. That's where their first origins came from Guatemala. And yes, you're correct. And a lot of them were trained by U.S. military. And they started off as enforcers for the Sinaloa cartel. They were the muscle for them.
But at first, they're supposed to be the good guys.
Well, they at first they're military guys. They work for the government, and then of course they faction off into their own gang initially, and started working with the Gulf cartel, and became the enforcers for the Sinaloa cartel. And once they started getting the numbers, their call to action was the violence that they brought. They were just known for the level of violence, the beheadings, the different aspects of violence that they brought that separated them from the other cartels that the other cartels would not do. The other cartels might shoot people up, but these guys went above and beyond that. And so they got a name for themselves, and they factioned off and created their own cartel, the Zetas cartel. I mean, when I was in Mexico, there was a case where they wiped out and killed 72 migrants that had come in mostly from Central America. There was one survivor. They went into another town because of information that they had received from a source of a person, a snitch from that town, possibly gave out some really good information to one of the Zetas. But the Zetas, instead of going in there and investigating who that source was, they went and killed over 300 people, basically wiped out the town. That's how these guys function. and they're still there. Now they were basically somewhat dismantled because of our case. The hierarchy was taken once the attack, and we took 8 of them into custody, and so there was some dismantling of the organization. So they faction off into what we call now, they're called CDN, Cartel del Noreste, or Cartel of the Northeast. But they're still there. They're still very present and still in the war with the Gulf Cartel in southern Texas area.
Let's go back to the day of the ambush. Did the Zetas know you were coming, or they just control the highway and just taking on anybody who came down it?
I think both. I firmly believe both. They controlled the highway, and I think they knew that we were on that highway. When this was a total ambush and a highly sophisticated uh, execution of this ambush. When we were pulled over to the shoulder, they executed what we call a rolling roadblock. As Jaime drove, pushed us to the right side of the shoulder, and when they surrounded the Suburban in front of us, we had our hands up, and I screamed and yelled at them that we were Americans, that we were U.S. Embassy employees, that we were U.S. diplomats. The vehicle is a diplomatic vehicle. And this whole time, I didn't know if, in fact, they had heard me. But you fast forward to 2017, when we had the trial, they were extradited and brought to Washington, D.C. They testified that, in fact, they did hear me, that they knew we were Americans, and they still decided to open fire. So they had the opportunity to say, uh-oh, these guys are Americans, which many times had happened before to DEA agents in Mexico, FBI agents, and even HSI agents that are held at gunpoint by organized
Mm-hmm.
criminals, and they find out they're American
Right.
agents, and then they just step back.
Yeah. So the brazenness of it, certainly after Kika Camarena was murdered, you would have thought the message was out to the cartels: don't be doing this to the Americans, because a lot of wrath is going to come down on us. Why do you think they did it?
And that's the shift. That's the biggest shift from these cartels, that they fear no one anymore. That underlying rule, that unwritten rule about the cartels are not going to mess with you because you're U.S. law enforcement, obviously uh, was disbanded that day. And unfortunately, we would talk about that all the time. Like, they're not going to mess with us because they don't want the wrath of the U.S. law enforcement. But moving forward from that day, 2011, they don't care anymore.
So, is there a moment there you get that spidery feeling on your neck, like this is gonna go bad?
It actually happened before the shooting, which is kind of I talk about it in the book, because there was a Mexican federal police officer on the middle of Highway 57 in the median, scoping out traffic by himself. So just imagine you're driving on a freeway here in Texas, and you see a trooper out with his M4, just looking at traffic, scanning them. People were slowing down to see what this police officer was doing. We did the same. We slowed down, looked at him, he looked at us, and I became very, very scared. And as I tell you, I get chills down my body, because I was still driving. I told Jaime, what the F is, I might have a little bit of a sailor mouth, but I'm not going to use the words that I used them. But I said, what the F is he doing? I mean, this is very rare. I've been in Mexico many years. I've gone through a lot of checkpoints: illegal, legal, military, cartel, and I know how to navigate through them. And what he was doing there was very out of place. And I felt scared, and I told Jaime, "Are you okay?" He says, "I'm scared too." I said, "Yeah." I kept on looking at him as we drove by with the mirrors to see what was up with this guy. I don't know if he was alerting the cartel that we were there. I don't know what was his purpose, but the feeling that you talk about came that day, that moment, not actually during the shooting.
And walk us through. Do they, in effect, execute you, take you out of the car? Walk us through the event of what
They
happens.
wanted
And does
us.
anyone ever say why they're doing it?
No, no, they have evil in their eyes, and these guys, all they want is get us out of the vehicle, and they're yanking on the doors. They are unsuccessful in doing that, but in the moment that we try to lock the doors, my window is rolled down. The armored window of my Suburban is rolled down about 2 inches, which we weren't aware of. This whole time, there's a lot of screaming and shouting. Hyman never said a word. I was yelling and screaming at them in Spanish, identifying myself. I told them, "Let me get my diplomatic passport from my backpack so I could show it to you." And they're like, "Effing get out of the car, open the door, da da da." And before you know it, two of the shooters came to my window and introduced an AK-47 and a handgun right by my head. And as soon as they did that, I rolled the window and it caught the barrels of both guns. And I braced myself up against the post of the Suburban. And just so people understand, the back of the Suburban is full of boxes, so there's no way for us to run to the cab or to the cargo area of the Suburban. And without notice, they opened fire into the cabin and striking Agent Zapata multiple times on his torso, lethally on his leg with the AK-47 round. I get shot once in my chest and twice in my left leg. I'm sitting in the front passenger seat. There's no room to go. I at one point even grabbed the gun from the handgun and wiggle the gun and burned my whole hand, and eventually still had my finger on that button. And as soon as they pulled those barrels out, the window went up, and they sprayed over 100 rounds at our armored vehicle on the right side. I then pulled the lever, the gear shift down, and pressed Jaime's leg onto the gas pedal and crashed their SUV that was blocking us to try to get out of the X, and get back on Highway 57. But Agent Zapata became unresponsive, and the vehicle just rolled into the median. And then I try to get the Suburban back on the highway, and people will see the pictures online and in the book. I have some pictures on there where they destroyed that vehicle. It was just, I mean, the tires were shot out. They say that they wanted to carjack us and wanted the vehicle. It didn't make any sense. They destroyed that car, and so they left. And the second vehicle that leaves of the shooters does a U-turn and comes back and parks right in front of the Suburban. Two of the shooters come out and they face me, and they come out with two AK-47s right in front of the hood, and they start shooting through the window. And I just freeze at that point, and the ballistic window is stopping the rounds from coming in. There's these so people can understand, armored windows, and they'll eventually give way.
Right.
And they were trying to shoot, and there's pictures where you'll see the two marks of the two shots where they're trying to penetrate it. But then they run back into their SUV and leave. And at that point, I make a phone call that people can hear online. I usually play it during my presentations. It's a call that I made to the U.S. Embassy. It's a frantic call for help. Eventually, I called the only person I trusted. You talk about corruption. I only trusted one person of the Mexican Federal Police, and that was the commander that led our vetted group. And he was the one that was able to deploy a helicopter 40 minutes later to come and rescue us.
And that's the call.
And that's the call that I made. I called to the embassy first, and the embassy, the switchboard operator doesn't know what's going on. I'm yelling at him. I'm Victor Avila from ICE. I'm an ICE special agent. We've been shot on the highway. And they route that call to the regional security office. The diplomatic special agents answer the phone. I happen to know one of them is my friend. And, they're like, where are you? What are you doing on Highway 57? Like, you're not even supposed to be out there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then another ICE agents jump on the phone. A lot of people start jumping on the phone. And I get on the phone with them. I then get on the phone with the Mexican Federal Police, and eventually get on the phone with the pilot to give them directions, because I know exactly where we're at on Highway 57.
And this is a pilot for the
Mexican Federal Police.
Okay.
We're about 4.5 hours north of Mexico City, in the middle of nowhere.
And it took how long?
40 minutes, which is a long, long time to be there.
And you're sweating it that they're going to come back again.
Oh yeah. Well, I'm shot. Jaime's shot. I'm trying to take care of and control the bleeding. I'm trying to control my leg because I'm thinking I'm bleeding out myself.
And are you starting to lose consciousness?
No, I never lost consciousness.
Okay.
I was at a very, very high alertness that, as a matter of fact, when we got to the hospital, that's when the fear set in for me. And I talk about this in the book because people ask me, were you afraid when you were getting shot? No, I didn't have any feelings. My life didn't flash before my eyes. But when we were going to the hospital, I was petrified. And that fear that set in, I don't wish on anyone, because I thought they're going to kill me at the hospital. Because I've seen these cases. The cartels go and finish people off at hospitals. They even go to funerals and kill the family members at funerals. And I knew for certain these guys know that I survived. The Zetas don't leave any survivors, and they're going to kill me at the hospital. That's why I refused any IV. I refused any medication, because I didn't want to alter them. I thought they were going to kill me. I thought the hospital was in on it. I thought the doctors were in on it. I didn't tell them who we were. They didn't know that we were Americans. They assumed that we were Mexican federal police, and I was okay with that. And I didn't tell them anything. It was a very, very dramatic entrance to the hospital. Jaime got sent to one trauma room. I got sent to another. And this whole time I'm on the phone with the only federal police officer that I know, and I'm begging him to send the reinforcements. Eventually they came in about an hour later, secured the hospital, and these, heavy duty SWAT guys, like the photo you have, they're walking to the room, and they said, Victor Avila, we're here on direct orders from the commander. You're safe now. And that's the first time I breathed a little sigh of relief, but still no Americans. The Americans don't show up about 4 hours later.
Do they bring medical help that you can trust the Americans?
Yes, at that point they brought the U.S. Embassy doctor, and once it was secure, then I almost yelled at the medical staff. My name is Victor Avila. I'm an American. I'm a U.S. Embassy employee, and and they were kind of like, oh my goodness, they didn't know, but there was a great treatment at that hospital. Great medical treatment. As a matter of fact, the trauma surgeon in Houston, because I got flown from there to Houston, knew the head trauma surgeon at that hospital through a conference, which is kind of unique. But he says, you were actually in very good hands, and I was treated very well.
So the Roman army had a procedure or process where they would go to a village, and if it didn't surrender, they killed every living thing, every animal, every child, and dismembered them and made a big spectacle of it. And then what they would find eventually, everybody would surrender. Is that part of what the cartel is doing by the violence and fear? Is that you're just going to give up, or you're not going to oppose, or is it something else? Is it satanic in a sense?
It could be satanic. I tell you, it's evil for sure, but they've done it. They've actually have done that. They have terrorized the country. And you talk about surrendering. We've already seen the federal government in Mexico do it and surrender. And I'll give you a quick case. The ICE HSI had located and obtained a warrant for El Chapo's son. This was about a year and a half ago.
Yes.
And you probably know about this story.
But tell our listeners, I do.
And HSI was very excited. They got the Mexican military. They went into Sinaloa, right into the heart of the Sinaloa headquarters, cartel headquarters, and they grabbed him and they caught him. Well, the Sinaloa cartel didn't take that very well. And they sent hundreds and hundreds of Sinaloa cartel members in that city. And there was a huge, huge shootout. And they started threatening the family members and civilians of not just civilians, but the family members of the military. They went to the barracks and sent a message to the Mexican president saying, if you don't release them, we're going to start executing all these men, women, and children. And people, it's a double-edged sword here because it's a war. And that would have been the opportunity for Mexico to say, enough is enough, and we're going to war. And you bring everybody, and you bring the Marines, and it's going to be bloodshed, and a lot of innocent lives are going to get lost. I understand that. But because he decided to kneel before the Sinaloa cartel and asked them to be released, they did release him. Now, you talk about having upper hand. It's not only been in Sinaloa with the Sinaloa cartel, it's been with Jalisco, the cartel Jalisco New Generation. It's been with the Gulf cartel. It's been with Los Zetas. They control Mexico. And this is the part that I want people to understand. No longer are the days of where the corrupt politicians instruct the cartels. No, it's the other way around. It's the cartels instructing the politicians. You might have some politicians with a lot of power, and they're still there and exist. But overall, the control and influence is by the cartels.
So are there parallel governments?
Absolutely, without hands. It is lawlessness. It is a failed state in Mexico. Now, people say, can you go on vacation in Cancun and Cabo San Lucas? You'll be fine. Yes, because you got these pockets of areas that it's okay. But you can't drive throughout the country. If you're telling me you want to drive from Monterrey somewhere, I'm the first one to tell you don't do it. They're hijacking people. I have the videos to prove it. Hijacking people on the highway. American tourist, any kind of person with a vehicle.
So how long does it stay okay in these pockets? Because, here in Dallas, you hear the oil families, the wealth, they go to Cabo. They've all got mansions in there, and they think they're immune from all of this.
They're not immune from it. The violence is all around there. And it's one of those things that it's very hard for people. Ask me all the time, is it safe to go down there? There are Will I go to Mexico City? Yes, I will go to Mexico City. I have gone to Mexico City. I wanted to go to Mexico City because I hadn't gone back after the shooting, and it was just for my well-being, to go back where I used to live. We left our home and never went back. So I always tell people, if you left your house today, you're never going to go back to that house. Now you're going to go to a different country or a different state, and you have to start from scratch. You need a toothbrush. And that's what happened to us. We left and never went back. We didn't see our furniture and our clothing for over a year. And so it was, it's kind of shocking you have to, your life is thrown upside down. But, people ask me all the time, yes, you can go to Mexico City and be okay. Yes, you could go to Cabo and be okay. I don't know about Cancun so much, but there's these areas where even the cartels kind of leave it alone because tourism.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to explain, but it's still okay to do that.
But the wealth is there, which is perfect
Yes.
for kidnap ransom, which they're really big into.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. They have now taken control of so much of the inner part of the country because the borders we know are theirs. But the inner part of the Zacatecas, Michoacan, Tijuana, even it's a border down further south, the peninsula, they have really have a major impact. Now their impact is on politicians and who's getting elected. They're putting their people there, who's going to work for them. And this is a huge, huge impact on our government of the United States and our people because the cartels are headquartered in Mexico. But they are present here. Where do you think they're bringing the human smugglers of drugs into the United States? And so we are impacted 100% by all of their actions in Mexico. People think, well, it's happening down there. It doesn't happen here. No, the violence has spilled over. The drugs, obviously, the poison, the record numbers of fentanyl seizures are through the roof. I mean, there was a huge one here in Dallas about a month ago in the East Coast, huge hundreds of pounds of fentanyl. And the pill mills that are produced in Mexico, the counterfeit pills, the methamphetamine, the super labs, all through the help of China. And where are they bringing it? Into our communities. The last stat that I saw, in the last 7 years, we have had over 800,000 poisons. I don't call them overdoses. They're poisonings by the cartels. That's more than COVID. That's more than wars. And no one blinks an eye because of the deaths.
We're going to pause for a moment for a break. Okay, we were just talking about how the cartels control or poisoning people with fentanyl, but I wanted to go back and pick up the shooting. Did Jaime, your partner, did he expire on the way to the hospital, pass away in the hospital? And what was the process to recover? How long did it take you to recover? And then walk us through the trial.
I was officially told by the doctor at the hospital he had passed away at the hospital. When we got rescued and put into the helicopter, he was obviously unconscious, but I still believe that he had a pulse. And they brought him in, and then the doctor officially notified me. And there was a lot of issues with the government of Mexico with an autopsy and to release the body. You got to keep in mind, all of a sudden, we're in a foreign country. And let me tell you, as a Hispanic of Mexican descent, I felt like such a foreigner. I'm an American, but I love Mexico. My parents came from there, but I felt like such a foreigner and such very lonely being there. For all intents and purposes, I could have been in China. And that's how I felt because there's absolutely no backup, the corruption and all that. But anyway, we got out. My family was extracted in a very unique fashion. We were finally reunited in Texas. And then eventually they didn't want me nowhere near the U.S. border. So my physical recovery was done in Washington, D.C. And I was out there for several months recovering from my legs and getting back to walking and the PTSD and all that.
But then at some point you say to the superiors, you screwed up. You really kind of sent us to a certain death. What's the reaction from the suits to all of this? Do they start closing ranks, cover up? What happens?
Completely cover up. We were all this happened under the Obama administration, and my family and I completely failed by the administration. I never asked for any special circumstance, any special favors to be done of me. I just wanted to be taken care of as a loyal federal employee that I was, and a good one at that. And I'm proud of the job that I did. But I didn't get that backup. I didn't get that sense of, we're going to take care of you, Victor, and that didn't happen. As a matter of fact, walls were being put up, people were being taken away from me, and we're told, because later on, everything comes out. People years later said, "Oh yeah, they told me, they sent out emails, stay away from Victor, don't talk to him," because we did sue the government. We filed a lawsuit. It's very difficult to sue the government
Yes.
because of the immunity issues, and we tried to pierce through some of those issues, but it was unsuccessful. Why? Because the Obama administration wouldn't release the documents so we could present them to the court, because President Obama exerted executive privilege on these documents, not just related to our shooting, but also related to Fast and Furious, because two of the weapons recovered in our shooting are tied to Fast and Furious. And so all of that gets blocked. The judge is, can you give us the documents? And we're like, we're in a catch-22 here, Judge. The government won't give it to us, so we can't prove our case, and the case is dismissed.
And quickly tell the listeners briefly about Fast and Furious and how those weapons got out of the U.S.
Operation Fast and Furious, probably the biggest debacle case that ever existed in the federal government, mostly led by ATF, but also involved in there was FBI and DEA. And these are weapons that were allowed to walk, and I say walk, meaning allowed to go into Mexico with any furtherance of as to where the weapons were going to end up. And we're talking about thousands. You'll read stories and hear this 2,000 weapons. There's a lot more than 2,000 weapons, and these weapons have ended up not just in Mexico. The Paris shooter is the massacre that happened a couple of years ago. That's a Fast and Furious weapon. El Chapo had a 50 caliber weapon when he got arrested. It's a Fast and Furious weapon. Many gun shop owners were affected by the Fast and Furious in Arizona and Nevada. It wasn't just we've got 2 U.S. federal agents killed. Agent Brian Terry in December of 2010, and then 2 months later we get shot. And so you have 2 U.S. federal agents directly killed by these weapons that are under the supervision of the federal government.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe is that because I survived and I'm going to expose that, I get treated like a pariah. All of a sudden I get treated like I did something wrong to the government, but all I did was get shot and serve.
Well, was it a case that it was a sense of embarrassment? The administration didn't really want to acknowledge how bad the situation was down there, that Americans, agents were being killed, and that it was a political foreign relations issue?
Definitely all of the above. Embarrassment, corruption, exposure.
On this side.
On this side, yes, under the Obama administration. I mean, you have Attorney General Eric Holder, the first Attorney General in history to be held in contempt of Congress, because he lied, because he was aware of the operation, and they lied. They were not aware. The Operation Fast and Furious was going to be a model, believe it or not, to be spread out throughout the United States. That's why these weapons that were used against us were found out of Texas, not out of Arizona. And that's where the tie comes in.
So which weapons, the weapons that killed Jaime, were they tied to Fast and Furious?
Absolutely. The AK-47s.
Uh-huh.
We have the ballistic reports. There was actually supposed to be 3, but we never say 3 because I don't have the ballistics on the third weapon.
And some of these people were extradited that committed the murders?
All of them. One was presumed dead. There was 8 shooters. One was presumed dead. So 7 of them were caught. And they were caught by an extraordinary cooperation by the government of Mexico and U.S. law enforcement. I'm talking about HSI, FBI, U.S. Marshals going into Mexico and doing an extraordinary amount of good old-fashioned police work that nabbed these guys.
I mean, I'm somewhat shocked, though, with the corruption, or was it just the case that the Mexicans said, hey, they're too hot to handle?
I think sometimes you have to force their hand. And I think at this point, Mexico had no choice but to assist us in that.
What did you learn from their trial, and what things surprised you in the trial?
Yes. One that was pleasantly surprising was that they did hear me, that I did say that, in fact, that they knew that we were Americans. But beyond that is how they testified to the level of sophistication of these cartels. That's why I tell people, when you think about these cartels, I want you to think of them as Amazon. How the money that Amazon has, the
Yes.
structure, the hierarchy,
The
the
logistics.
logistics, the intelligence, they're just the same. High level of intelligence, high level of sophistication, high level of networking. I cannot stress that enough. And they testified to that. How, for example, they had to check out their weapons for that day. The cars that they drove, they have fleet cards, gas cards. I mean, this is like a private corporation. This is the Zetas, and this is how highly sophisticated. Everything is in order. This is not a street gang. This is not a drug gang. And I don't even call them drug cartels anymore, because that's not what they are anymore. They're terrorist organizations, and right now they're highly into the not just the drugs, but of course the human smuggling, the human trafficking.
All right, we're going to conclude this episode, but we're going to come back with a part 2 because I want to talk to you about leaving the agency and your efforts on the border today.
Sounds great. Thank you.
So, Victor Avila, thank you so much. And stay tuned, everybody, for part 2 that'll be coming up.